When professors pored through ancient texts in Oxford, they made a huge discovery about Jesus. Biblical scholars Dr. Dirk Obank and Professor Jeffrey Smith are hard at work investigating ancient fragments of scripture in a library at the University of Oxford in England. And one particular text stands out during the course of their efforts, a piece of text which they first believed to be a lost gospel of the New Testament. Soon, however, Smith will discover that it's an original copy of the heretical first apocalypse of James, an account of Jesus' lesson to his brother. The text is written in Greek and believed to date back over 1,500 years. Indeed, it's undoubtedly a tantalizing find. That's because it's the first such text to have been discovered in Greek, the language in which the story was originally composed. Obank and Smith are from the University of Texas at Austin, and what they discovered is of great importance. Not only does this rare document bear text in the Greek language, but it also appears to detail teachings that Jesus gave to his brother, and the theological implications of this could prove to be significant. But first, let's consider the notion that Jesus actually had a sibling. After all, this might not be known by everyone, yet the New Testament does in fact refer to brothers of Jesus. These are Simon, Judas, Joseph, and James. The scripture also alludes to sisters, though these are never referred to by name. However, a number of Christian denominations, including Assyrians, Catholics, and the Eastern Orthodox Church, believe in the so-called perpetual virginity of Jesus' mother Mary. So, according to these branches of the faith, the Son of God can't have had any biological brothers or sisters. Those described as siblings of Jesus might actually have been something else. For instance, they could have been children of Jesus' father, Joseph, from a former marriage, or they alternatively might have been nephews of Joseph or Mary. All of this confusion might simply have arisen as a result of poor translation through the centuries, however. That's because the words in the New Testament, which have come to be seen as brother and sister, actually mean a variety of things in the different Semitic tongues. So it might simply be the case that we've misinterpreted things. But the fact that brothers and sisters were referenced at all suggests that these individuals had a particularly close relationship with Jesus. Whether or not they were actually siblings doesn't change this. In fact, some experts have posited that these people were important figures of early Christianity. A figure known as James the Just was a so-called brother of Jesus, as stated within the New Testament. The former appears to have been an influential person within early Christian circles. And that's the case whether he was a brother, half-sibling, a cousin, or merely a close associate of Jesus. James's significant status within Christianity arises from his involvement within the Jerusalem church. The city was apparently the site of the first ever church dedicated to the Christian faith, according to the Catholic Encyclopedia and the Book of Acts, and James was said to be a leader at this fledgling religious institution. James's importance is thought to have increased when his namesake and fellow Christian, the Apostle St. James, son of Zebedee, was killed. This act of violence apparently occurred at the will of King Herod Agrippa I of Judea. St. Peter also left Jerusalem, meaning that James now had particularly central status. The Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church states that James was, from an early date with Peter, a leader of the church at Jerusalem. And from the time when he left Jerusalem, after Herod Agrippa's attempt to kill him, James appears as the principal authority who presided at the Council of Jerusalem. Details of James also crop up within a variety of biblical sources, including the Gospels of Luke, Mark, and Matthew. James is mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles and the Pauline epistles too. Furthermore, he's also alluded to in Jerome and Eusebius. The leader of the Jerusalem church plays a critical role in the first apocalypse of James, which is believed to be a section of the New Testament Apocrypha. These are a collection of texts related to Jesus and his apostles, which are said to have been composed during Christianity's beginnings. Certain parts of the New Testament Apocrypha were once touted as being true Christian scripture. However, from about the 5th century onward, a more limited range of biblical stories were largely accepted within the religion. As such, many of the faith's major branches don't regard the Apocrypha as official Bible texts. The New Testament apocryphal writings were, in fact, believed to be heretical. This term relates to religious ideas and points of view which exist in contradiction to the agreed consensus, and a person who stands by such nonconformist beliefs could be labeled as a heretic. Interestingly, there is a simple reason why the New Testament apocryphal texts are said to be heretical. A man named Athanasius the Great, who served as the 20th bishop of Alexandria for a period during the 4th century AD, didn't consider them to be official doctrine. Athanasius is believed to have chosen the 27 books of the New Testament which are still being used in the present day. In fact, he penned a letter in the year 367 which set out this rule, writing, "No one may add to them, and nothing may be taken away from them." Before Athanasius' ruling, debate had raged about what was an official part of the New Testament and what would be omitted. If nothing else, this helps to illustrate the various ways in which Christian teachings can be understood. It's not quite as simple as reading today's version of the New Testament. Broadly speaking, the texts related to Jesus, which are largely believed to be the earliest ones, were included within the New Testament. The others, meanwhile, were designated as being apocryphal, and they were often prevented from reaching the masses. Over time, these narratives were suppressed, and they now exist only as incomplete documents. As many of us know, the New Testament is much smaller than the Old Testament, and the 4 official Gospels that were included within the New Testament canon tend to ignore the younger years of Jesus' life. Yet, information on this period can be found in other texts which weren't officially accepted by Christian officials. One specific text which doesn't appear in today's version of the New Testament is the first apocalypse of James. This narrative focuses around conversations held between the book's namesake and Jesus. Furthermore, as we'll soon discover, the texts focus on ideas around the afterlife and visions of the future. The first apocalypse of James was actually uncovered in relatively recent times. In December 1945, a man named Muhammad Ali al-Saman found the text alongside 52 other documents. Al-Saman made his discovery, which had been worded in Coptic, in a community in Egypt called Nag Hammadi. Another Coptic version of the script was later found too. In 2017, however, the text emerged from obscurity once more. This time, though, the work was in Greek, the language it was originally written in. It had been located at the University of Oxford within a collection of other texts known as the Oxyrhynchus Papyri. For reference, parts of this collection were uncovered during the 19th and 20th centuries. Only around 10% of Oxyrhynchus Papyri manuscripts are literary documents. Many of the other texts relate to taxes, trading, or censuses. Most of the scripts were composed in Greek, though some were written in other languages such as Latin and Arabic. Experts have been trying to put some order on the document within the Oxyrhynchus Papyri since 1898. Over the years since, more than 5,000 have been worked through. Yet this number reportedly represents up to only 2% of the total works that need to be translated and sorted through. After all, many of the pieces of text are apparently no bigger than a single cornflake. The scraps which bore the first apocalypse of James in Greek was found in 2015 at the University of Oxford's Sackler Library. And this was thanks to the tireless work of Dr. Dirk Obink and Professor Jeffrey Smith, who had sifted through the texts. The document has been traced back to the 5th or 6th century AD, and based on the manner in which it was written, the experts believe that it may have once been used for the purposes of teaching someone how to understand and compose the written word. Brent Landau is one such specialist who agrees that the text may have been an educational document. The University of Texas at Austin Department of Religious Studies lecturer told UT News, "The scribe has divided most of the text into syllables by using mid-dots. Such divisions were very uncommon in ancient manuscripts, but they do show up frequently in manuscripts that were used in educational contexts." Landau went on to characterize the author of this Greek version of the first apocalypse of James. Apparently, the teacher would likely have had a particular affinity for the text. Landau reached this conclusion based on the length of the writings. You see, most teachers would only have utilized a brief passage, whereas this document presented it in full. Reflecting on the discovery he helped to make, Professor Smith told the University of Oxford's website, "To say that we were excited once we realized what we'd found is an understatement. We never suspected that Greek fragments of the first apocalypse of James had survived from antiquity, but there they were, right in front of us." What exactly does the first apocalypse of James actually deal with? Well, it details some of the lessons that Jesus supposedly bestowed upon James. These include mentions of heaven, and there are some prophecies in the text too. In fact, there's even a reference to James's own demise included in the text. The account primarily takes the form of a discussion between Jesus and James. Furthermore, added to the bottom of the script is a section which vaguely alludes to James's fate, and though it's a little fragmented, it's believed to suggest that James will be crucified. The initial section of the text alludes to James's worries about crucifixion. Then, in later sections of the script, he receives passwords. These are apparently given to James to allow him to overcome evil adversaries and get into heaven. The account also has references to James himself, which tells us a little about who he might have been. According to the text, he was the leader of the Christian church in its initial stages, and his relationship to Jesus is made explicit when the latter says, "You are not my brother materially." As we explored earlier, Professor Jeffrey Smith was one of the experts who had come across the ancient Greek text, and he elaborated on the importance of the narrative in an interview published in the University of Oxford's website. He said, "The text supplements the biblical account of Jesus' life and ministry by allowing us access to conversations that purportedly took place between Jesus and his brother James, secret teachings that allowed James to be a good teacher after Jesus' death." Dr. Dirk Obink, who had worked with Smith on the text, was thrilled by the discovery of this Greek version of the first apocalypse of James, and he was especially interested in what the text teaches us about how readers engaged with these scriptures in the past. Dr. Obink told the University of Oxford that the writings show how the early reading public interacted with different versions of the gospel. In the city center of Oxyrhynchus in Egypt, Greek-speaking elites read the Gospel of James in the original Greek, alongside our earlier surviving copies of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Dr. Obink went on to lay out how things were different for people who lived outside of urban centers. As he explained, in the rural countryside at Nag Hammadi, it was the heretical Gospel of James that hermit monks chose to translate into Coptic for native Egyptian speakers. So people of the period apparently soaked up information in varying ways. The discovery of this Greek language section of the first apocalypse of James was first announced in November 2017 at the Society of Biblical Literature annual meeting in Boston. But as for what lies down the line, Landau and Smith will be publishing their initial discoveries on the subject in the Greco-Roman memoir section of the Oxyrhynchus papyri.